Well, my friends, as you have probably heard, we are back with yet another release that is just in a poor state upon actual releasing, especially on PC. So this time we're talking about Borderlands 4, something that I was actually pretty excited for after a bit. I wasn't at first, given the kind of mediocrity that was Borderlands 3's story content and writing, which Borderlands 3 was a game that was a great time to play, and Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, which struggled on both fronts with kind of tedious gameplay and a tedious and kind of annoying story. So with Borderlands 4, they are trying to backtrack and really correct a lot of the mistakes made in those titles. And from what I was able to play of this, that is mostly reigning true. And from what I've heard of a lot of folks, that is very true. It's getting very good scores across the board. People saying that it is what it needed to be and a great course correction. However, the optimization and performance of this game is so bad and it cannot be understated, especially with the visuals of this game. Now, the visuals of Borderlands have never been the focal and center point of the game. Not once, not ever. The games have just been fun to play, loot fests that basically kicked off the looter shooter genre. And personally, I would have been totally fine with the graphics looking almost the same as Borderlands 3, but with just a little bit better lighting. That would have been perfectly serviceable. But they announced that they were making this in Unreal Engine 5. And oh boy, is there issues with this engine. And sometimes it may not even be issues with this engine, but how developers are optimizing for higher end hardware and then scaling it back over development time to kind of fit on lower end hardware or medium tier hardware even. And that has just caused so many problems recently with so many different games. And here, I think it has darn near peaked because the visual uplift with this game, I don't think anywhere justifies how bad it runs. So just for shits and giggles, I started this game with everything maxed out just to see what would happen, and I played through the entire intro sequence of this game with those max settings. And I did use DLSS at quality just to see what would happen. I did not use frame generation because honestly, if you can't break at least 45 to 60 FPS on a regular basis, it is not even worth using frame gen because you will feel the cutback in responsiveness as you drop from that core 60 down to 45 and lower. You will feel it in the game. Even though your image looks really nice, it won't feel nice to play. And frame gen works better and looks better with less artifacting the more frames that you have to work with at base. For me, a shooter needs to consistently be at least 60 FPS to be playable. None of this 30 frames per second crap because it feels terrible to play and looks juddery as hell. So if I can't keep 60 FPS, it just isn't worth it for me to even play. I have between a medium tier and high tier computer with an i9 12900K, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and a RTX 4070. So I thought with how this game looks and how I kind of would expect this game to run, that would be enough to at least play on max settings and hit at least 60 FPS with like balanced DLSS. And if I got high enough frames, maybe use frame gen to kind of get a little more uplift. But I was very, very wrong. So even when I switched it to balanced DLSS upscaling, I still was only managing to barely break between 40 and 50 frames on the regular, which for me wasn't really justifying using frame generation to get those extra frames if my base frame rate just wasn't good enough and didn't feel good enough. Because even in the 50 FPS area, the game still felt, with NVIDIA Reflex by the way, all the way up to boost, it felt very laggy to play on mouse and keyboard. So even if I used frame generation, which would add more lag into the equation, it would feel like crap to play. And lo and behold, minutes after I am sitting there trying to troubleshoot and find some pretty optimized settings to even play this game at, Gearbox decides to release some official graphs on where each GPU, commonly used GPUs on the market, should be sitting settings wise for correct optimization. And the 4070 Ti Super, which is an upgrade over my base 4070, is still requiring multi-frame generation to hit over 60 FPS with mostly okay high, very high settings enabled. But you are not hitting that 60 FPS threshold without multi-frame generation. And from what I experienced with even trying some of these, it still did not feel good to play because of the extra input lag present in the base frame rate of the game without frame gen. So even if it looks kind of nice, it feels like crap to play. And that is the biggest issue for me that keeps popping up. If it doesn't feel good to play, then what am I even doing here? And even looking at the 5090 at the exact same 1440p resolution, you are not getting off of frame generation. It's still a requirement, and that is insane to me given that there is 32 gigabytes of VRAM on a 5090 card. And even looking at 1080p levels of quality on the 5090, you're still looking at having to use frame generation to get a consistent frame rate over 60 FPS. What are we doing, guys? What are we doing, Gearbox? What are we doing, AAA studios? This is beginning to be the norm, where system requirements are so high and games are so unoptimized on release, it's not even worth buying anything on release anymore. It's no wonder that bigger games are just failing to hit their sales expectations, because most people who are on just normal little PCs, low to mid tier, are just completely forgotten about or just left with the muddiest and terrible looking games in order to even run them acceptably. This was very obvious with Monster Hunter Wilds, where even the highest settings didn't even look that great. A lot of the textures in Monster Hunter Wilds are not very high quality, even on the highest setting. And forget about upgrading to the high-res texture pack, because if you aren't running a 5090 or a 4090, then you are not getting a consistent frame rate with those. You're going to have hitching and crazy amounts of issues and frame drops with that high-res texture pack. At its base, it looks like a problem with Unreal 5, but every now and again you see a game, like for example, Expedition 33. That game, I know it's not open world, but it still ran over 90 to 100 frames per second for me on my 4070 without the need for frame generation. Just normal quality DLSS. I had turned bloom down because bloom was a little ridiculous in that game. But that's basically all I had to turn down to reach more than acceptable amounts of performance. And keep in mind, Expedition 33 still has 4K textures and looks very, very nice, but that's that studio's first game they released, and it runs better than most any AAA game. And if you want a better comparison, even with the non-open world games, look at Silent Hill 2. This is a game I haven't personally played yet, but I've heard nothing but reports of Silent Hill 2 running like complete ass. And that's crazy. Silent Hill 2 does not look anywhere as good as Expedition 33. Running on the same engine, but running 3 times worse even, like for what I can see from people's benchmarks. And personally, I'm going to find out very soon how that game runs, because I'm going to be playing it through before Silent Hill F comes out in the future. I've been kind of waiting to play it through for a good time, and now that I am for sure not playing Borderlands 4, I have already refunded my copy because I refuse to support studios that don't put out the effort to make sure the general public can even play their games at an acceptable level. Since this happens so often, I've become more forgiving with just waiting for an acceptable time to buy things in the future when they are fixed and ready for the general public to consume. And even then, you can just get it on a discount and play it for a lot cheaper and have a better experience. So why not just wait, you know? Early access and early adopters of games nowadays are just the beta testers from my point of view. And that's how it's felt for a lot of game releases that I've been a part of on release. And it's just gotten tiring. It's gotten to be a lot, and just I'm tired of it. And in the case of the previously mentioned Monster Hunter Wilds, that game even performs worse today than on release. I love technologies like DLSS and frame gen. I think they are fantastic. I think they have their place in gaming for sure, but I hate seeing studios completely crutch these things in order to make an acceptably running game. Because nowadays you can just go back to games before those and just realize how much we have taken steps back. Games used to look so much sharper, run so much cleaner, and just be more of an acceptable experience and better experience overall, because you didn't have all these crutches and fake frames basically to make up for the lack of optimization. And I hope something happens soon to really correct this, because a lot of games I'm looking forward to, I'm now just completely leery of and just looking at with a side eye, wondering if it's going to be the next one to screw me over. And I know a lot of other people are feeling this same way. And I feel like everyone is pretty much justified at this point in feeling this way, because we've all been stabbed in the back so many times by some of our favorite studios. But there is something to be said about the performance of these games on console. Now, the PS5 and PS5 Pro don't have a huge gap between them, and a lot of people just look at it and go, that ain't a good upgrade. But honestly, recently with how games have been, the PS5 Pro, I recently got one months ago for the release of Death Stranding 2, and during playing that, I actually realized how much better my experiences were on the PS5 Pro than on the base PS5. And now, in comparison to playing on PC, PS5 Pro has kind of become the de facto place to play a lot of these games. Playing Monster Hunter Wilds on the PS5 Pro is a buttery smooth experience, which is insane to me because that's far from what it is on PC. So I looked up and have been doing my research on the console version of Borderlands 4 to see if I just wanted to get it there instead. But lo and behold, it's got its own issues and is barely breaking the 60 FPS cap, even with the PS5 Pro in performance. And the field of view for me was the biggest killer. The field of view on Borderlands 4 on console is down all the way to 60 degrees. That is super narrow and gives me, that feeling of being zoomed in iron sights with a gun without ever being zoomed in. It kind of makes your character feel like it's on stilts, like your camera is pushed too far forward relative to where your character is. And honestly, when games are like that, it can just make me nauseous and give me headaches after a while. So I refuse to even give that a chance, because PlayStation is a lot more stingy with their refund policy, and if it didn't work, I'd be just pretty much stuck with it. So props to all of you who are having a good time on console, or even having a good time playing this on PC. But for a lot of us, that is not the experience, and I'm just gonna pass on this one, to be quite honest. I'm gonna pass on it until either console gets a field of view slider and some performance updates, or PC gets massive performance updates, and I'll play it there. And when that happens, I will put out my own video on how Borderlands 4 actually is as a game and how it plays and everything else. Because for what I got to play, it was pretty good. And I am honestly really disappointed that I'm not going to be playing it. But there is a lot of games coming out, and a lot of games that have already come out that I haven't played, and that I feel like deserve my time a lot more than Borderlands 4, given that the studio just didn't care much about how they released their game, evidenced by the fact that they released all these benchmarks and stuff after the game has released, because they knew full well if they released a bunch of graphs saying that you were going to need frame generation in order to play their game acceptably, a lot of people straight up would have skipped out on it completely. So that alone leaves a dirty taste in my mouth. So you guys sound off in the comments. Let me know how you're feeling about this, because it's a very disappointing situation for me. I was really looking forward to this. It's a bit of a more downer video. I like to do things that I really enjoy on this channel, but I really had to vent about this because it really got me a bit tilted. But anyways, if you guys would like to see more from me, hear more from me, subscribe to the channel, like this video if you found it informative at all, and hopefully I'll see you on a future video. Peace.